Hi, I'm Jennifer Tomlinson, Global Channel Marketing Lead at Microsoft. Welcome to the Partner Marketing Pros podcast, where we have candid conversations with Microsoft partners all over the world who have achieved strong customer acquisition and retention from their excellence in marketing. In this podcast series, our partners are going to share marketing experiences, secrets, and best practices, as well as practical advice and resources that can help you improve your marketing results and drive growth. Today's episode is a companion to a podcast we first aired in July, focused on marketing team organization, structure, and resourcing. Today, in part 2, we will speak with Gerry Murray from IDC about marketing budgets and investments. Gerry Murray is a research director with IDC's Marketing and Sales Technology Research Service. IDC has worked closely with Microsoft for many years, and in particular on the partner marketing business with our team. So welcome, Gerry.
Great. So now that we've talked about marketing infrastructure a little bit, we've talked about some of their operational issues and technology. Let's talk about budgets and investment. How much do you think a partner should invest in marketing? What are you seeing in terms of, funding and budgets and allocation investment? And how does that compare, do you think, to other industries?
Yeah, so this is a really tough question because, budgets are all over the map, depending on the different kinds of the product and service mix of the business, and what the underlying margins are for each different types of product platforms and services have different margins for the business. And so when we have been looking at this question for the last dozen years or so at IDC with respect to high tech marketing. And, it really tends to kind of settle around, a kind of a 5 to 10% of, revenue range.
Yep.
And that's split across, your staff and the programs that you're running, including all of your advertising and events and, various programs that you're running, as well as outside agencies you might be hiring. So the thing about that is, though, it tends to be a higher percentage of revenue as companies get smaller and are more growth oriented, growth focused.
Because they're investing in building awareness and all that. Okay.
Yeah. So if you're a smaller company and you have, aspirations for fairly high growth, you're going to want to overinvest in marketing. The example we used at the top of the call about, if the company's got 20 clients and they've got more than enough business to keep them going for the next 2 to 3 or 4 years with respect to those relationships, maybe you can underinvest in marketing, but you want to be very specific about the resources that you're using in marketing to enhance those 20 relationships and increase the use cases and people and buyers that within those accounts. Whereas, if you've got a more complicated product set and multiple audiences in multiple places in the country or the world, then, and you want to grow, you're going to have to, overinvest with respect to marketing. And it's interesting, over the last 5 years or so, we've seen fairly steady growth in marketing budgets, on average over a course of, several hundred companies that we survey on a regular basis. It's in the 3 to 5% annual growth rate. And then last year kind of flattened out, which was interesting. Obviously there's a lot already, very large budgets assigned to marketing for many companies. And so whether we see that pick up again or not, or whether we see, it's still an enormous corporate commit to the marketing function. And, it's a, very difficult thing to look at on average, but just as a rule, I think those numbers are pretty good rules of thumb. But then we always counsel our clients to make sure they understand that there are very specific business drivers and objectives within a particular business that might make them want to be under the benchmark, or in fact over, and possibly way under or way over in certain aspects of the way they invest in marketing. So you really do have to, like I said before, the business and the nature of the business model, and the growth objectives of the business need to drive really everything. The budgets, the staffing, and the technology.
Right. So that's really helpful to have that range, and I think you said 5 to 10% sort of on average. Now, in terms of the industry changing, we've moved sort of from upfront revenue to often recurring monthly revenue. So one of the trends that I've been sort of seeing and sort of telling partners to do is don't necessarily look at just the top line percentage of revenue like we used to traditionally do and then invest that, and look at what's your cost of customer acquisition. And what, if you get a customer today and you have a 3-year, lifetime with them of recurring monthly revenue, it's really what's the cost of acquiring that one client. Any thoughts about that, or do you agree? Or
Yeah, it can be a real challenge. I mean, we all talk about attribution as, I think, mostly aspirational issue, but the tricky part about measuring marketing is making sure you understand, how much of the journey is measurable, right? Can you measure from A to Z through the whole process? Or do you need to measure, from the marketing process to the beginning of the sales pipeline, and that's the kind of the end of the attribution cycle. Although you can want to continue to measure progress and influence within the pipeline. So, in a lot of cases, the kind of ROI on marketing proposition is again dictated by the business model. If you have a long, if you spend 18 months or 2 years, very long cycle, many different kinds of touches and interactions across both marketing and sales, and maybe even other parts of the business to close a deal, it's very difficult to take one particular factor or function in the business and say, oh, well, 50% of it came from here and 50% came from there. And companies really have to kind of sit down and think about, well, how much of this model makes sense before we start, quibbling over, how much each person or group contributed. Let's just try to create a model that, we understand and can trust and is useful with respect to, driving how we spend our next dollar in customer acquisition, right?
Right.
In some cases, it's pretty clear. If you got, fairly short cycle, you're getting people onto your website, they're going straight to a product trial, and then they're buying, licenses or subscriptions from you. Then it can be much, it's
easier
much
to measure.
It's much easier to measure. It's much less complicated. There's less time involved. You don't have these big time gaps of months go by when you don't hear from the buyers.
Yeah.
And then they suddenly resurface and you're not sure why did they come back?
Yeah.
So I think it's something that a lot of marketers have struggled with, and I think as long as they're very good at articulating to the rest of the organization, particularly senior management who they report to, what is reasonable to measure. And what is something we don't want to do without, but we can't necessarily create a causal link between investment and a transactional level return to the business.
Right.
I think we had one anecdote where one CMO got so fed up with this whole argument with the sales team about whether marketing was worthwhile or not, she literally shut down all the discretionary marketing for a quarter, and he said, "Okay, guys, you guys think it's all going to work without any sort of marketing effort, and there's just sales can do everything. Let's just see how it works out." It didn't work out very well.
No.
And at the end of the quarter, sales came back begging for mercy and
excellent.
Ramp marketing back up, which was a good sign for everyone. But who wants to sacrifice a quarter?
Exactly.
Everybody had to feel an extraordinary amount of pain for that. What should be fairly common sense and not necessarily spreadsheet driven, sense that there is a contribution and a very important role that marketing plays, and that sometimes, unfortunately, the marketing process is a very long cycle, and it's hard to draw direct, conclusions between investment and activities and transaction level, relationships with customers. But I just caution people to not find themselves in a situation where it gets to the point where we're just going to shut it off and see what happens. That's a real bad idea. But you will discover a brand new appreciation for marketing if you go ahead and do that. And I think it's really critical for marketers to understand that marketing, the value of marketing, is not self-evident, and that they do have to work a little bit to explain what they're doing to particularly sales and a CEO who is typically their internal customer in sales and the direct report with the CEO. and make sure they really understand, why marketing is doing what it's doing and what the expectations should be in terms of measurable impact to the business or to the pipeline or whatever it is. Because marketers can kind of get stuck in this trap where, everybody kind of thinks they know how to do marketing.
Yeah.
And, they do know how to do random acts of marketing, but they don't understand how to put together a sustainable presence and campaign across a whole lot of channels and connecting, your tweeting activity to your video blogs, to your landing pages, to your trials, to your, and in fact, right into the contract negotiations, right? It's
Yeah.
like, that's a process that requires multiple functions in marketing and sales and even product and finance and elsewhere in the business to really work together to create a harmonious, very intuitive and logical and hopefully kind of seamless, frictionless experience for the customer. That's ultimately
Right.
what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
Make this all work for the customer.
And I just from this conversation, I'm realizing that's probably one of the key things on this podcast to mention is that we need to get much better at that and sharpen our ability to analyze and prove it. We have the technology now and the instant feedback, unlike we used to.
So this is another reason why I try to, especially for small and medium-sized businesses, I try to counsel them to really simplify the infrastructure, because the problem you were just describing happens because a lot of these tools that we have today, while they are extraordinarily powerful and they can measure very small slices of the customer relationship and the marketing process, they're not all from one vendor. They're not all designed to work together.
Mm-hmm.
as this process of sharing data and event monitoring and all this intelligence that we're gathering and helping marketers understand how they can take data or interaction or insights from one system or channel in or outside of marketing and bring it in and do something brand new for the customer, do the same marketing better, faster, cheaper, but also, bring in new insights. For instance, what can marketing do if they got their hands on the contract expiry dates out of your finance system?
Right.
Well, they could run these, 30, 60, 90-day campaigns ahead of, the renewals and start to tell you, hey, look, this person's not there anymore, or there's no budget, or there's been an M&A, or they're in the middle of an M&A, and this isn't going to be a 24-hour one-click renewal. We need to put some effort into this stuff, into these accounts. So there's a lot of things that I think there's a lot of expectations that the automation brings to the table, and it goes back to the attribution argument as well. But at the same time, I think what a lot of marketers find when they have dozens of these tools is that they spend a lot of time knitting them all together.
Right.
And that can, slow things down, it cause a lot of frustration, and it's sort of, the whole is not greater than the sum of the parts, and that there's a lot of frustration that can happen, and it can exacerbate any of those communication problems that are happening, with sales and or executive.
Yeah, I'd agree, absolutely. So, just two last questions before we run out of time here. One is, so in terms of ROI, where would you spend the majority of your budget today, or where are you seeing that people are, some of the data I've seen is people are increasing, obviously, in digital, increasing in content and social media. Any recommendations or things you're seeing out there?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, as a trend, yes, we've seen digital marketing become, up to and close to, but not quite surpass the investment in traditional marketing and advertising programs, particularly for large enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd say for small and medium-sized businesses, digital marketing is way less expensive for the reach that you get from and the precision that you can get out of these channels and tools. So, I typically tend to expect smaller businesses to spend their money on building. Well, again, depending on the business model, if you're trying to get new logos in the door, you're spending your money on awareness activities and tools and staffing that's going to get your word out to a broader audience.
Mm-hmm.
And on the flip side, if you're working on this small set of accounts and you've got more than enough business to get out of them, you're really investing in account-based marketing, and you want to really get deeper and deeper into those accounts. Normally those are much bigger companies than you are as a solution partner, and you want to start to understand their internal networks and how you can use your success with a given use case and team user base within the account to leverage over to other buyers in the organization who may not know each other until you start to introduce them and draw make the connections. So I think there's there's a couple of different, again, the business has to drive the investment, everything, the budget, the technology, the staffing, and the investment model. So there's these kinds of questions are impossible to answer. Like everybody yes, everybody invest in mobile.
Yeah.
Well, if you're, it all really depends on where's your audience. Invest in wherever your audience is.
Yeah. But the point I think you made, which is important, is that you're now seeing sort of the digital side of the investment exceeding the traditional marketing, like events and things like that.
Well, it's very interesting. We're seeing, in large enterprise, we're seeing they're about, maybe close to 50-50, not quite. Digital still a little bit less. But, what's interesting kind of, as a counterpoint to this investment in digital, and this is contrary to what we've heard from a lot of Microsoft solution partners and small businesses, that events are starting to become like the second biggest part of the spend. And I think there's a big, for very large organizations and high-tech companies, we see these huge events, and people, I think, are really obviously very actively connecting to each other socially and digitally, but don't know each other very well. And so there's a premium now kind of coming back on in-person meetings and building relationships. However, when we talk to Microsoft solution partners and smaller and medium-sized businesses, they're very wary about events. They're even online events can be a lot of big resource commit if they're doing it on their own. And going to someone else's event, there are a lot of costs and time and resources that get involved in the event, and they have to be very careful. So if you're a small business, I would say, look at local events that are, if you're selling to accountants, is there a local chapter?
So industry specific.
Industry or role specific professional organizations that you want to have a presence at, and make sure that the audience is there. Make sure that ideally you have the opportunity to speak, have a platform to present, and that you're not kind of stuck in the back of a giant airplane hangar sized auditorium with a little tabletop that no one's going to find their way back to.
Yeah. Great. Now, last question. What are some of the trends, or is there anything left that we haven't already touched on that you see happening 2020 and beyond that technology marketers should be thinking about for the future?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of disruption that's still coming. I mean, you think about the last 10 years in marketing and how all this technology has completely transformed the practice of marketing. And now we have other waves of even very different technology, particularly with respect to artificial intelligence. And we're going into a world that's kind of the global mind shift around privacy and consent, and a lot of sensitivity about how much data is being collected and how that's being used in all kinds of relationships in our lives. So I think the marketers do need to be respectful about how they're thinking about customer data and using it to not only do better marketing, but also create better relationships with the customer, and hopefully getting to the point where they're not, that they're actually collecting data, but using it for the benefit of the customer. And that might be, okay, initially we're going to talk to you about your problem you're trying to solve, our solution, how it works in the context of your business, and get that resolved for you. Is there more that we can offer to you? Can we train you up on our system? Can we train you up on how to run the type, like if we serve accountancies and we serve dozens and dozens of them, we have a lot of best practice that we've discovered just by interacting with other businesses like yours. How much of that can we deliver over the top and in addition to the product and services that we offer? And that's a tremendous opportunity for marketers, to really think about, how do I help each individual customer of mine benefit from the collective learning and wisdom of all of the customers?
Yeah, that's a really fantastic point, and I think extremely important going forward. So, Gerry, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your lots of knowledge and expertise in the industry, and you've seen this all happen out in the field. And I think our partner listeners today will really appreciate your very concrete and specific examples and information. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sharka. It's been a pleasure.
Great.
It's always a fascinating topic to talk about.
Yes, we could go on forever, but here we go. Thanks so much.
All right.
Thank you so much, Gerry, for sharing all the information today. It's so useful for our partners to hear from an expert who is not only across the Microsoft ecosystem, but also has a window into other technology companies in general, which help to give us more context and clarity to what's actually happening in key marketing operational issues today. So thank you very much. Thanks for listening to the Partner Marketing Pros podcast. We hope you gained some fresh insights and learned some new practical ideas today that you can implement in your marketing program. See a detailed transcript of the session and helpful links in our show notes. We encourage you now to listen to the companion webinar, which will go into further detail on all of the things that you heard here. It is located within Smart Partner Marketing at aka.ms/smartmarketing. This is just one of a 9-part series that is designed to help you accelerate your marketing efforts to engage buyers and propel your business growth.